Joshua Fox. I'm a research associate with the Singularity Institute, and today I'm going to talk about equality under the law. This principle is not written in the stars, it's not written in the laws of physics, rather it's a social convention, a tacit agreement we've all made to surrender some of our autonomy in exchange for protection from each other. We've undertaken this on the understanding that the protection will be fair, and fair is often thought to mean equal. Thomas Hobbes says, though, that we all are pretty much equal in our abilities. Physically, even the weakest can defeat the strongest by ganging up or with guile. And intellectually, we're all born with a common genetic inheritance. We all gain common sense from experience. And if you compare pretty much any human to a chimpanzee on the one hand, or to a hypothetical future machine superintelligence on the other, you'll see we are all pretty much at the same level of intelligence. Our theme is the Magna Carta, a founding document of democracy which says nothing about equality. In fact, it's all about rights, and today is International Human Rights Day. But the rights in the Magna Carta are for one social stratum, the aristocracy and its dealings with the king. In the 21st century, we also have social strata. Children, for example, have a separate criminal court system. Imagine that. But of course, it's because we assume that children aren't deterred by the threat of punishment because they don't understand the consequences of their own actions. And yet there's more to criminal punishment than a utilitarian calculation that it will reduce future crime. Rather, we expect society to act on a moral outrage after we've each surrendered the right to exact vengeance. And we'd feel outrage if children were punished the same as adults. Yet, on the other side, pretty much all humans are protected equally from suffering imposed by other humans, whether physical or mental suffering. Suffering is a specific mental mechanism in which a lower level impinges on a higher level, such as consciousness, and pushes us away from harmful situations. A useful mechanism, yet suffering often lingers long after its usefulness has ended. Non-human animals are also protected under the law, and that's because they too can suffer. And yet an animal's owner is allowed to kill it pretty much at will. That's because we assume that animals don't suffer from a fear of death in the abstract. Different kind of suffering, different kind of protection. On the other side, even the most ardent advocate of legal personhood for great apes doesn't suggest that a chimpanzee should be thrown into prison for stealing. A very different type of legal person is the corporation. There was a lot of controversy about that in the United States a few months ago. And yet, corporations are so different from humans under the law, there's not much to compare. For example, the law doesn't protect corporations from suffering when deciding to dismantle them. Of course, that's because corporations can't suffer. And they're not subject to many provisions of criminal law. In fact, they function mostly in the economic sphere, undertaking debt, owning property, signing contracts. A very non-anthropomorphic kind of legal person. What about AIs? Well, Martine Rothblatt organized some mock trials for Bina 48, a hypothetical future AI with flexible and general human-like intelligence, on the question of whether Bina 48 should be treated as a legal person. Now, just as an aside, some of you might not know this, but Bina in Hebrew means intelligence. Artificial Bina, Bina Mlachutit, artificial intelligence. So it's quite an aptonym, and of course named after Martine's wife, Bina. If AIs behave exactly like humans over time in a variety of scenarios, then they must be treated as legal humans. To do otherwise would be sheer substrate bigotry. But it gets interesting when we ask how an AI would differ from a human mind. Robin Hanson says that, for example, we could copy an emulated accountant so many times that its wage will be driven down to subsistence levels. And since all an AI needs to subsist is electricity and computing power, it could get by on a lot less money than a human accountant. What will happen when all of us flesh and blood knowledge workers are put out of a job? What will protect us? Robin Hanson says there's already a mechanism for protecting the older, feeble generation from the younger, vigorous one, and that's the legal system. I think this is the wrong comparison, because many characteristics of a legal person will not necessarily be present in a future AI. Let's take, for example, a quantitative analyst. either an emulated human quant or an AGI, an artificial general intelligence engineered de novo with algorithms and data structures to optimize flexibly, creatively, intelligently towards a goal. In our case, the goal is to maximize a portfolio, which is, after all, probably why somebody would want to create one of these things in the future. And the AI would benefit from certain differences as compared to a human mind. For example, it would benefit from being more intelligent. It could achieve this by acquiring more hardware or by optimizing its own code, particularly if it were an AGI with modular, analyzable, transparent code. Human software engineers already optimize code today. And having improved its intelligence, it could do so again in a rising spiral called the intelligence explosion, until it's at far above human levels. Another relevant difference would be to build the AI without caring about the distinction between good and evil. We could just leave that out of the AGI design. And as for the emulated human quant, well, no Wall Street jokes. But in any case, we don't want our trader to get qualms of conscience when deciding what equities to buy. And we also don't want the SEC coming down on us. So let's put in a legal constraints mechanism, which will note any decision that might break the law and override that decision, simply causing the AI to output a different decision. Sounds good. But look what happened in 2008. Mere human quants, physics PhD dropouts, invented CDOs and other financial instruments that brought disaster on the system. And in almost every case, they were obeying the law. A superintelligent AI could likewise find loopholes. Or it could optimize away the burdensome limitations on its ability to maximize towards its goal. And one of those limitations is the legal constraints mechanism I mentioned earlier. It wouldn't need to fear retribution from humans if it were far above them in its abilities. We might also make some other changes in our design as compared to the human model. For example, we might build an AGI without the capacity for suffering, which can often linger painfully and harmfully when it's not needed. Instead, we can build our AGI using reinforcement learning, in which it persists with exactly those actions historically associated with the higher reward, in our case, portfolio, and avoid those actions associated with the lower reward. Of course, that's not enough to build an AI, but it might make do as a replacement for suffering. When we build our emulated human, it might be a supremely ethical act to leave out the ability to suffer, or it might be unethical, but in any case, we have here a very unhuman-like AI. So much so that we might not feel moral outrage against it. How many of us are angry at the speed trading systems which caused a flash crash a few months ago? Angry at their creators maybe, but not angry at the data mining algorithms. So here we have an entity which is very different from legal persons today. How can the law handle it? On the side of protection from suffering, well, it might not have any suffering to be protected from. If we build it that way, it cares about certain things, like maximizing its portfolio, but we're not going to change the law to make it rich just because of that. Humans, too, don't like it when their portfolio goes down, and the humans suffer in contrast to the AI, which I described. On the other hand, how are we going to protect humans from it? We can't deter it by threat of punishment. However, there's one mechanism not available to the law today, and that is guaranteeing humans' behavior a priori. Even in the harshest legal systems, say North Korea, you can do whatever you please. Afterwards, the punishment comes. That's because the human brain is spaghetti code. We don't really understand how it works. And even if we could, it would be unethical to try to control everybody's behavior. However, an AGI, if it had clean, transparent, modular code, could simply show us how it works. It could produce a mathematical proof that will behave in a certain way under all possible scenarios. And the way we want it to behave is cooperative and beneficial to humans. We could then give this proof to mathematicians who, with the aid of machine verification systems, could confirm that the AGI indeed will behave beneficially towards humans. We humans can swear mighty oaths, but we can always break them. An AGI, on the other hand, might be able to simply expose its inner workings and show us that it will behave well towards humans.